Coogs' house last week. The whole conversation was who's leaving Houston in the transfer portal. But now, after 4 big commitments over the weekend, it's time to talk about who's coming to Houston via that same portal.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. We're making your first listen each and every day to the everydayers out there. If you want to join the conversation but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. Yes, you were online over the weekend. You can probably guess the question of the day today is, do you think 100 people, unarmed, could take down a single large gorilla? It's a question today over the weekend's question today on Locked On Coogs. Today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at the Amazon Fire Stick. Fire TV and Fire Stick all put together. Great way to set up your streaming services. But we're talking more about folks bringing the show later because we've got a lot to talk about. I want to talk about the streak of NFL draftees being broken, kind of more about Cougs going to pros in the second and third segments. But first, the big topic du jour right now for Houston Cougars in the football program is this transfer portal. Last week, we talked a lot about how A.J. Halsey and Jeremiah Wilson left abruptly, both, just before, just after, Wilson right before and Halsey right after the spring game, made for some awkward interactions. Looks like they are kind of starting to find their own footing. If I were to predict it right now, Wilson committed to Florida State, so that's not a prediction anymore. I'd imagine Halsey's heading to Miami to play with Zach Etheridge. We'll talk about that if and when it happens, if and when we need to. But we're moving on because the Houston Cougars are moving on, and they've brought in a plethora of talent. Some guys I'm pretty excited about to replace both Halsey and Wilson, and it looks like they're kind of going for a depth idea or depth scheme here. They're going to have a bunch of different guys do a bunch of different things. Let's go through the names right fast. Linebacker Jesus Machado, we talked about him before as a guy we thought was going to come to Houston. He officially committed and signed in the last 3 days. Keany Parks, DB from Wyoming, he committed and signed over the weekend. Zelmar Vedder, a Sacramento State defensive back that I thought was the size of a basketball player, he committed and signed over the weekend. Then listed as a linebacker at FIU, listed as a defensive lineman coming into Houston. Eddie Walls III is coming in. He's 6'4", 250. We'll talk more about him as well. That's the 4 guys that officially signed and committed. Several people in recruiting services were also putting in a crystal ball on one Rook Brown, another DB from Wyoming. Check my text right here as this is being recorded just to make sure that that's not happening as we're recording here. So you see here a lot of talented guys looking to move up in the world of college football by moving to Houston. Jesus Machado, obviously coming from Tulane, missed 2024 on the IR, but played in 2023 under, Willie Fritz. Played that Mike linebacker spot. Wasn't great in coverage that year, but was a box linebacker, pretty sure tackler, 59 solo tackles, 80 total tackles in that season. And I'm really excited about him. The other linebacker I think is probably more interesting. I want to tell you about the roster. Machado comes in as a guy that knows Fritz's culture, knows his fit, knows Corey Platt, right, as Corey Platt looks to lead this defense in the fall, coming off his own injury in 2024. And so I think that how those pieces fit together will be interesting. But I imagine Machado is as much a locker room Fritz culture guy that can make some plays as much as he is like a high-level performer. In that sense that he can't high-level perform. I guess I shouldn't say it quite like that. But I do think you're going to see Machado more involved in being a face the program kind of thing. Eddie Walls is interesting to me, the FIU transfer, because he was originally listed as a linebacker. He was recruited by many schools as a linebacker, and then Houston signed him, and on the graphic they put out, all the information they put out about him, he's listed as a defensive end or a defensive lineman. He's 6'4", 250. I'm not saying he can't play the part, but it's interesting to see what he'll do as he adjusts to that. I think it also tells us kind of what Houston's thinking here, because Austin Armstrong's defense uses those hybrid end/linebacker type guys a lot. We talked some this spring about LaTrevion McCutcheon, the rising, I guess originally Holgerson recruit, came in a couple years ago. He's kind of he's going to fill one of those hybrid spots. Could Eddie help push and compete for that? Could they make each other better? Could they both get on the field in multiple hybrid spots? All that remains to be seen. I do think, though, that Eddie Walls is a natural pass rusher, had 5 sacks and 30 hurries last year as a linebacker, right? And so I think that that's, as he grows into and starts to move into the putting the hand in the dirt kind of stuff, you're going to see more and more and more success. I will say that Eddie Walls, for what it's worth, I say he was a linebacker. If you look at his lineups and where he lined up, he was pretty much inside of 3 yards of the line of scrimmage the whole season in pre-snap alignment. So it's not like he was some guy blitzing from 8 yards away or anything like that. He's a good pass rusher, right? The exodus of DBs, though, I think leads everyone to wondering more about the defensive backs being brought in. Keany Parks, again, the 6'1", 190-pound corner from Wyoming, played 575 snaps, allowed just 2 touchdowns. What I really liked about looking at his analytics, though, was 2 of his highest 3 Pro Football Focus grades, both in terms of the game and in terms of pass coverage, were against BYU and Arizona State. Those are both Big 12 schools. Those are both Power 4 schools. And what I think is worth pointing out about those games is that I would argue those are 2 of the better offenses in the Big 12 last year. And that he played really well against them is indicative of pretty successful snaps as a corner. He did not have a great game against Boise State. Boise State's heavy run, so as a corner, his analytics can get thrown off because if he gets beat twice, he doesn't get a whole lot of time to kind of pull his numbers back into positive territory. And again, 575 snaps last season, allowed just 2 touchdowns. That's a pretty successful keep guys out of the end zone rate. I like Keany Parks a lot, though. If you listen to some things Wyoming coaching staff say about him posted on YouTube and stuff like that, it's crazy to find those they're really high on this guy's character and the work ethic he puts in. And when you tag that in with his athletic ability, they think the sky's the limit for the guy. He's looking to play at Houston to get him into the Power 4 and kind of show that off, much like Zelmar Vedder and what about that guy's name here? Rook Brown, I'll talk about in a second. I keep want to hesitate because he's going to supposedly he's really into Houston. He's visiting and he's been crystal balled and all that. But Zelmar Vedder, 6'3", $195. He legitimately walks around looking like a high-level college basketball player as far as his size out there. He, frankly, for what's worth, is a very similar build to Richard Sherman. I know those are really big shoes to fill, but kind of one of the things that made Sherman such an all-pro everything was that he was corner-level quick and had the length of more like a pass rusher. Zelmar Vedder obviously is working on that, and as far as the athleticism goes, he is 6'3", he is long wingspan, he is quick and does use that length to his advantage. He had just 1 pick last year and over 650 snaps, but also allowed just 2 touchdowns in that same window. He's only credited with 4 missed tackles, and I think that's impressive. When you look at how many snaps he did play, especially factoring he is constantly being asked to come in and play the slot corner on bigger tight ends because he is 6'3", and so he's constantly kind of in the action as far as run game goes when needed. Very versatile player in that because he is 6'3", is 195 pounds. He can come in and cover the modern tight ends are going out in pass patterns, line up in the slots, hoping for mismatches and disadvantage the defense. He can kind of move into the box and be sufficiently sized that they want to run the football. And then I was thoroughly impressed. Obviously, Sacramento State playing a very different level of football than the Big 12 in Houston, but I was thoroughly impressed in watching Zelmar Vedder continue to win reps in the red zone. A lot of, jump balls get thrown down the red zone. Being 6'3" with long arms helps in that. A lot of quick slants. Being able to get across a guy's body and bat a ball down with long arms and a big frame helps on that. He's a really impressive one-on-one defender. I want to see what Austin Armstrong does with him. Mostly intrigued by that because I think of Armstrong as being a very cerebral defensive coordinator, kind of does some complex stuff. When you have an athlete like Zelmar Vedder, you got a lot of things you can do with him specifically, and how that fits into the fold will be fascinating come the fall. And then as they add depth to the DB room, Rook Brown, crystal ball that to come to Houston. He's 5'11", 185 pounds. He was the other corner at Wyoming. Played pretty high-end pass defense himself. He wasn't quite as good as Keany Parks against BYU and Arizona State, but I do think if you look at his both his analytical grades and his highlight clips, he's kind of more consistent across the season. So you take what you can get there. I like the idea they'll bring them in together, both Brown and Parks, because then they kind of play off of each other, learn the system together, learn Houston together, learn the culture, the program, etc. together. So Houston has committed and signed 4 players in the last 3 days, and looks like they'll have another one very, very soon if all things go right. We'll see more on that and keep you updated on that as we go. I want to talk for a second now about Houston Cougars leaving the program for the NFL, how that went over the weekend with the NFL draft, and all of that. Before we get too far, it is the NBA playoffs. It is time for the NBA playoffs, and while the Rockets struggled over the weekend, you don't have to, because the NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your bet for first $5, get $250 back in bonus bets if that bet hits. I love how simple and easy the app is. Quick payouts, same game parlays, live prop bets in those same games, all kinds of fun action over at FanDuel. Go check it out now. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com, claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Park Rangers locked on Coogs here. Talking about Houston's roster, who's in, who's out. And the story over the weekend for who was out was the NFL draft. NFL draft hopefuls have been doing combines and pro days and tryouts and meetings and interviews. It's the most extensive job interview this side of a government agency I think you could have. And I say that to say that it's always a stressful time for the guys going through it. Houston had a number of guys off of last year's team go through it. And for the first time in 9 seasons, Houston had no player drafted. We talked going into the weekend how that might happen, how it was a streak on the line. The 9-year consecutive streak comes to an end. It was the second longest streak in the state of Texas for any college football program putting guys into the pros. A&M at first, like 17 or something like that. But like the Giants never really count. Okay, he probably really counts. I get, anyway, streak comes to an end, and I want to say that while that streak comes to an end, I want to first express that that does not mean that guys off of last year's team are not going pro. Keith Cooper signed a undrafted free agent contract, meaning he's now under contract with the Detroit Lions. And you could almost argue that getting to sign a contract afterwards almost helps the player out more, because you can kind of if you get multiple contracts, pick a contract where you think you could stick. Detroit, up-and-coming team, great coaching staff, tough-nosed on both sides of the ball. I don't say tough-nosed defense, but tough-nosed both sides of the ball. Keith Cooper's going to fit in great there. I think it's a great spot for him. He had a handful of guys invited to mini camps. Malik Carr invited up to be in mini camp in Philadelphia. I think Malik Carr as a very moldable piece of clay at the gigantic frame at tight end. I'm excited to see what Philly uses him like as a tight end. You think of all the different kind of funky formations they do with Jalen Hurts up there in Philadelphia. I think Malik Carr can kind of come in. I don't know if he's involved in the tush push quite as much as he's a big frame. Do you launch him over the line of scrimmage with him being 6'8", 6'9"? Do you throw jump balls him in the end zone on the fake tush push? Kind of like, what do you do with him? It's going to be fun for them. Minicamp invites. Michael Batten got multiple. Michael Batten, a linebacker, got invites to camp in Seattle and Chicago. I did see one Chicago report indicating that he had chosen Chicago. Cannot get that confirmed right now, but that's interesting to see there. He's got options. Ajani Carter, minicamp invite to Kansas City. Jake Wiley, the offensive lineman, has invites to both Kansas City and Denver. Have not seen him pick one, or if he's going to have to pick one. You simply only have to pick one if they overlap, right? And I don't know if it matters in the grand scheme of things, but people really wanted to have this last year's team with no pros or no drafted pros as a indictment on the program or indictment on the team. I would stress that 2 other Big 12 programs did not have anybody drafted. I would also point out that Utah's guy, I guess technically was actually a basketball player at Baylor before playing at Utah. And so as you look at how these things unfold, the people that really don't like Willie Fritz are going to say, see, his team was so bad, no one got drafted. The people that really do like Willie Fritz are going to sit here and tell you, well, yeah, no, this guy got drafted because they were looking at a bunch of guys that Dana recruited, Dana. And people will never stop talking about Dana Holgorsen. At some point, we'll stop talking about Dana Holgorsen. I do think, though, that in that somewhat of a discussion or debate, I don't know how hot the debate is necessarily. It's why it's a segment 2 kind of conversation, not a segment 1 kind of conversation. I do think it's worth pointing out in the debate that Keith Cooper, Malik Carr, Michael Batten, these guys that are now getting the post-draft kind of NFL looks that you see happen all the time, happens for Houston every year, even when they have someone get drafted. A lot of transfers that came to play for Willie Fritz and those names. And take that with whatever grain of salt you want to. We're still looking for a couple of the guys to get moved. I know people are going to laugh when I say this. I really did hear people mentioning Donovan Smith as a guy getting looked at to get a camp invite. People are kind of keeping tabs on it. And as they're recording this podcast, I have not heard that. I think a lot of people want to see him healthy because the frame he's got, and they just don't know what the shoulder injury ever looked like and what it looked like before all that. And then these camp invites are those kind of low-stakes situations for teams to do that. Donnie would be, I believe, the most like Holgorsen guy out of the group. If that were to be the case, outside of that, feels like a fairly Fritzian group getting into the NFL after the draft. And again, I don't think that matters in the grand scheme of things. For instance, a year from now, we're going to be talking about Boogie Johnson getting drafted. That dude's a pro. He's a wide receiver. He's a pro in a more pass-happy offense next season with Wegman and whatever package they do for Carlisle or Chris or whatever, with Wegman throwing the ball around and Boogie run the routes and all that. I think another year of tape, you're going to see Boogie Johnson get drafted a year from now. I don't think we have to worry about that necessarily. Right. If Corey Platt looks like Corey Platt did pre-injury, you'll probably see Corey Platt get drafted somewhere. Right. And so the Terrell McCutcheon, if he continues to improve, could be that guy, gets drafted as a corner. They got lots of guys that can make that jump. Lots of guys are really close to it where it's not really that big a jump. And so I don't know that looking back at last year's 4-8, first year of the Fritz-era, rebuild team, etc., is all that big a deal. I will say I did like having the second longest streak in the state of Texas to brag to some folks at other schools about. And so it almost hurts me more as a fan, I think, than it actually hurts the program, because I was kind of excited, hey, I know Austin's great and da-da-da-da-da, but you had that 1 year you didn't put anybody in the league, right? And now the tides have turned a little bit and all of that. And so, I guess that's more of a fan loss than a program loss as I see it, especially when you're still seeing guys end up in the league. And frankly, we're still seeing guys like Ed Oliver. We're still seeing guys across the NFL, former Houston Cougars, making plays in a big kind of way. And so I don't know that makes a gigantic difference as far as how the reputation of the program goes or anything like that. The pros that have been there are still out there making real plays. And then Case Keenum still signing contracts. I saw that he signed with Chicago right in the offseason. only I said that briefly when it happened back then, but like he feel like he's just a forever pro because everyone loves having him in their locker room. Anyway, Houston had no players from the 2024 football team drafted in the NFL. That's the story there. But they did have 2 players from the 2023 team drafted in the 2025 draft. What? Yes, it makes sense. Trust me, let's talk about it in 1 second. But first, today's show is brought to you by Game Time. There's no better atmosphere than an in-person NBA playoff game. There is a Game 5 in Houston. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric inside that arena. And with Game Time, you can be a part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it easy and fast to get playoff tickets, even when that demand is sky high. Tickets actually go down in price as tip-off gets closer, and the last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. I like all-in pricing, especially as you get for these kind of, high-value events. All-in pricing means there's nothing hidden at all. I like getting to know what my view is going to look like from that seat in that venue for that type of event, because they also get you tickets for concerts and theater and anything you need tickets to in and around the H or wherever you are. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Turn to play again. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download again today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Park Rangers, Locked On Coogs here. And I mentioned that one of the stories coming out of this was that Houston is one of 3 Big 12 teams that had no one drafted in the NFL draft in 2025 from their 2024 roster. And that's kind of a downer for a lot of reasons for you and I. I mentioned in the last segment how I don't think that's going to be necessarily this gigantic indictment of the program in a big kind of way. But I did want to talk about how 2 different guys from the 2023 team were drafted in the NFL draft. That's Matthew Golden, went 23rd overall to the Green Bay Packers. Jamaree Caldwell was also drafted in the 3rd round to the Los Angeles Chargers, formerly of San Diego. And both guys were Houston Cougars for 2 seasons before transferring in the winter of 2023-4 to their respective programs. Golden went to Texas, UT Austin, and Caldwell went to Oregon up in Eugene. Both spent 2 out of the 3 years in Division I college at Houston. Golden was a second-team All-Big 12, mid-season All-American, had 15 total touchdowns in his 2 years at Houston, the game winner at Temple, the kickoff return against TCU. Someone reminded me in the interim, he also, his first 100-yard game was in a rivalry game against SMU his freshman year. A big-time player and big-time moments. Had a couple drops here and there as a sophomore when the kind of game got put on his shoulders because Tank Dell was gone. But gigantic touchdown catch in the game that they should have beat UT Austin. We wanted to bring that whole thing back up again, right? Jamaree Caldwell, I talked about him the second year. I guess that was technically his junior year with back then the JUCO years counted. Anyway, incredible balance for a guy at 340 pounds, all the kind of dipsy-do and twisting and turning and pivoting on a single toe, it felt like at 340 pounds. Always continually impressed by him. He was a Coach Early guy. He was a big-time Coach Early guy. If you talk to the people that are Coach Early people, Brian Early, obviously the defensive line coach that left in coaching change, then kind of came back for his hot second the coaching change, but then was back out again. Anyway, Caldwell, I think, would have stayed had Early stayed. And I have some people trying to tell me that if Dana Holgorsen had stayed, that Matthew Golden would have stayed as well. I don't know how true that one is, but I have definitely heard it from people. And, Caldwell had 6.5 sacks in 2024. I mentioned Golden had 15 touchdowns over 2 years. These guys, 6.5 sacks in 2023, I should say, for Caldwell last year in Houston. Caldwell did have the highest Pro Football Focus defensive rate or grade on the defense side of the ball for Houston as well. It's hard in modern college football guys play for multiple programs. In modern college basketball, while the Houston program has kind of gotten where they just kind of take one or two guys a year at most in the transfer portal, there are a lot of programs that are looking for 6 and 7 and 8 new players every year. It's kind of the norm across sports. And so Houston hit this road now where it's like, well, do you celebrate that Matthew Golden and Jamaree Caldwell got drafted and fulfilled their dreams after having left your program? Does it change things that they left your program in the midst of a coaching change? Does it change how you view them leaving versus are they just like, I don't know, left an hour after the spring game? I don't know. I don't know what your answer to that is. I'm interested to hear you tell me in your comments down below or on social media at Painswith512. But I do think I'm happy for Matthew and Jamaree when I saw them walk across. I guess I saw Matthew Golden walk across stage in one of the moments of the weekend. The draft was being held in Green Bay, and Golden is there because he knows he's potentially a first-round pick, and he's got his nice suit. He's got his diamonds on. But he's also, representative of Houston. He's from Klein, went to U of H for a couple years. He wears that wherever he goes. He's very Houstonian in his swagger. And then he gets drafted, and the crowd just erupts. If you don't know NFL history, this is their first-round draft pick receiver they've had in like over a decade. They went most of Aaron Rodgers' career without doing it, and it was kind of a big sticking point for him. And now they've got this young quarterback named Caleb Love. They've got another wide receiver named Christian Watson. They went ahead and did it for Caleb Love, which is kind of fun. And the city, the fan base of over 100,000 people is erupting, cheering for Matthew Golden. He comes out, he gives his pump-up speech, and the crowd just can't get enough. They roar, they roar, they roar. It's a gigantic moment. And I couldn't help but feel happy for Matthew. And I know that there are people typing. I can see you typing right now in the comment section that you're not. And that's your prerogative. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's modern college football. There are going to be guys that transferred and changed programs. But I was happy for Matthew for 2 seasons in Houston. I celebrated his highs. I felt low during his lows. I was happy when he was successful. I appreciated his hard work. I cheered him on with the show, actually. I got to dissect his performances. It felt like any other Houston Cougar to me for a long time. And then to see him have another one of those highs out there in Green Bay, it was heartwarming. It was complicated, but it was hard to not feel happy for the guy. Matthew Golden, when he came to Houston, was a big-time recruit. It would not have been uncommon for him to not have chosen American Athletic Conference Houston in the first place. We gave him a couple years. And, I'm not saying the goal isn't to become the program people are transferring into, not out of, obviously, as far as the guys looking to make the big paydays go. And we got a long time on the show to talk about that. But in the present tense, seeing Matt go out there and do that was pretty cool. And I don't think it counts as Houston getting a guy drafted and keeping the streak alive. I don't mean to go that far. But I do think it should matter that, hey, part of his legacy, part of his development, part of who he is as a football player that got him to being a first-round pick as a wide receiver, that got him to being a guy that runs a 4.2, that got him to be a Green Bay Packer with hundreds of thousands of people cheering him on, involved important time at Houston. I think that matters. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Tell me in the comments down below. Tell me what you think. I think it works. I think it matters. Locked On Coogs is here for the everydayers each and every day. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow. I actually want to talk some about basketball recruiting tomorrow. We'll get to more on that when we get there. If you want more on transfer portal guys in and out, where they're headed, let me recommend the Portal Podcast from one of the Big 12. As we have Locked On Big 12 as well. Locked On Coogs are prime member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every single day. Go Coogs.